what we're going to do to start with, because montage is something specific, but also it has many meanings for different people. So we have montage in film, photography, digital, analog. And I thought we'd start by Dayanita talking about her process of montage.
Well, I'm really excited to be here with Cleo and Martino. Martino, for those of you who don't know, is the expert on the concept of montage, which comes from film, but also comes from architecture. And now I'm doing my own, what I've just today started calling my own magic with montage. This is an exhibition that is going on at the Jahangir Nicholson Foundation. It's called Photo Lies, because it's about these deceptions that I can make through photography, through black and white photography. So this is Padmanabhapuram Palace, a photograph I made in 2001. Kandalama Hotel, Jeffrey Bawa, 2018. And here it is, the first montage, which is it's just those two images spliced together. So the way it works is I gather all these images of architecture that I'm drawn to, and then I have a large table on which they sit, and like a DJ, I work between them till something emerges, something that I hadn't, of course, planned, but another space emerges, an impossible space. And so, as of today, I've started calling myself a photo architect, because all of you build places that exist, but I can build impossible places that don't exist anywhere except in these images. You know, a beautiful picture from Japan in one of the ryokans outside Osaka, a contemporary art museum. I am forgetting the name. But then there's like this Z cut that happens here. Do you see it? So the two images have now formed a third space. And when I flip that, I get this. So these spaces are getting created by accident, by chance, and then a third piece falls into it from another montage. All the prints are the same size. I physically cut them and paste them. There's no Photoshop. There's no enlargements. Another ryokan. Sept Library in Ahmedabad, Rahul Mehrotra. But then, what do we call this place? Or, what do we call this place? And this is the kind of magic that is happening in the montages for me, where it's a question. It's something that I want to discuss with Cleo and Martino. How is this magic happening? How are things just fitting into each other seamlessly? Scarpa, Brion Cemetery, Marthan Khosla, Maharani Bagh. But this is the space that I create. So what do we call this space? So do you get it? Is it making sense? This is the Brion Cemetery. I've used this portion, see, here, and put it onto Maharani Bagh, over here. And this is what you get. An impossible space. But it exists. It's in the experience of this montage. The Sept Library again. 7th century Kyoto temple. And guess what? It just fits in. And here is the cut, like that. So time and geography collapsing with each montage. The two questions I always hated in photography was the where and the when. And now that's exactly what I'm dealing with, because it's very much about the where and the when. You know, 7th century to 21st century. David Chipperfield Cemetery in Osaka, Kandalama Hotel, but look what we get, literally by splicing those two together. Kandalama again, Porto School of Architecture, Caesar, and the lines and the light with no manipulation, just all come together. It is really magic. And of course, you all know the famous Barcelona pavilion. But then I was in a washroom in Villa Serralves in Porto. And then they become one space. But it is an impossible space. The Kanazawa Museum and Jeffrey Bava. This is one made with about 3 different images, Japan, Corbusier, and Bava. This is, to the left, is the Swiss embassy, then the German embassy, and the Ashoka Hotel. And then there's Mona in them. And this is the other kind of montage I'm now making, which is the constructed contact sheets. And in the center of this, that's Pompeii, 79. That's Corbusier, Scarpa, Caesar's partner, Suto de Mora, Aldo Rossi, Gurjit Matharu, Mies van der Rohe, Ilora, Zumthor, Corbusier. So I make up my own history of architecture now because I go to places and I feel something. I don't know what I'm tapping into. But then it gets even more mysterious, where I go to the Ellora caves, which I'm sure all of you have been to, and I'm completely overwhelmed, as Mr. Doshi had predicted I would be. And then I come back to photograph Bijoy Jain's studio. And when we make the prints, I myself am confused. Where does Ellora end? Where does Bijoy Jain's studio start? So these are large structures, and you should be able to change the images because it's constantly evolving. That connection between Ellora and Bijoy Jain's studio doesn't go away. And this is the Serralves Museum in Porto. And here I created my own fiction, where I so enjoyed showing my work in that museum, and I thought it should have stayed there permanently. So I made my own little history out of it. And this is a similar kind of montage where it looks like it's the same place, but it's not. It's many different geographies, many different times. And the same over here, where it might look like it's one architect, but it's from all around the world and some very, very major architects. So that's the end of the slideshow, to just try and explain the montage idea and the constructed contact sheets, which I think of as another kind of montage.
And I think you have shown us something that you do, not just with this work, because Dayanita works with lots of other subjects in different ways. Like, you explode notions of things that we hold on to quite dearly. And I wanted to start by opening up and asking about what montage does for meaning in your world.
I love that it lies completely and seamlessly. So there are people who want to go to these places, but the place only exists in the photograph. And I have known from the start, and many of you now know also what a live photography is, and I thought, let's just make that more apparent. But in the process, I didn't realize that I would be building another architecture, an architecture that none of my colleagues here could build because it's impossible to build. And yet, because it's photography, because it's black and white, I don't think I could get away with this in color. And the way I photograph, which is with the Hasselblad, I don't do this and photograph. It's from my belly. It's a dance. And that's why I make those structures, so you experience the work with your body and not just with your eyes. So something is happening in how I photograph with my body and what I look for in these architectures that I think creates magic.
Martino, for you, your book discussed different architects and theorists' approaches to montage and how they saw it as being a tool of meaning or a way of finding meaning or a way of disrupting certain meanings. Could you talk about how that work has maybe fed into your curatorial practice?
Yes, I could, make an argument that, so montage, I'm defining montage through a number of points. One of them is, there's a plurality of images or fragments of images, which we have seen in your beautiful presentation. It's a spatial layout. It could be on a surface, or it could also be in sequence of time, right? If you think about cinematic photomontage. And so, as a curator, yes, the idea is to bring together, to juxtapose or to create some kind of visual narrative based on individual works, which don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. And so in that sense, you could say that, curating a wall in a gallery is creating a form of montage by, it's obviously not accidental that we're showing one work of art next to the other. The idea for the curator is that you have a dialogue or even a multi-channel conversation about among the many things. And I think that is the idea of montage, that it creates meaning beyond the individual work in the space in between. The white space of the wall creates a mental space for the observer to relate the images or works of art that they see on the gallery space, and then, it creates a third. And I think that's the power of montage. And it would be interesting to bring this into relationship with Dayanita's work.
Yeah, because also, Dayanita, you act as museum director, museum curator with your Museum of Chance sort of pillars and structures. We were calling them skeletons earlier. Like, you're shifting, changing. Can you tell us a bit about where that's gone at the moment in relation to Photo Lies, which is currently showing in Mumbai?
Yes, I think after this morning I'm going to call the empty museums or the structures of the museums as sculpture, as photo sculpture, because they don't have photographs in them, but they are my work, and they are three-dimensional works that you need to experience with your body. So that's a form of sculpture. So today is a very exciting day for me, because now I've got a lot of courage somehow today, and I'm talking about the montages as magic and the museums as sculpture. And it's great for me to be able to share this with Martino, because it's quite a specific area in photography, and we don't have examples of photographers making montages with their own images, and then in architecture to create these new spaces. So I've not been able to have much of a conversation. So it's really a blessing for me that Stir invited Martino here while my show is on, because I know I'm onto something. I don't necessarily know what it is other than the magic of it. So actually it's over to you, Martino.
Well, it's a blessing to have the opportunity to see your really stunning exhibition. Congratulations, and thank you for the walkthrough this morning. If you haven't had a chance, I would really urge you to go see the exhibition. It's 10 minutes away by taxi ride. And I also think, the images, the projections don't really, do justice to your work. I mean, it's a very good projection, but it's still only a representation. And I think, what I saw, what you just mentioned, this idea of the sculpture, I mean, there's a deeply spatial and three-dimensional dimension to your work, which doesn't convey. I mean, also, these multi-image, what do you call those? The photo...
Constructed contact sheets.
Constructed contact sheets. They're actually, so they're beautifully framed in these wooden frames, but then they're also mobile. You can move them around, and I think that idea of activating the images and sort of changing the constellation among them, I think is really, you know, important, and it doesn't convey fully in the static presentation that, you know, you can do on a projection.
Yeah. No, I feel, I mean, you saw me this morning and then this afternoon again. I just feel that photography needs to be activated. It needs to be ripped off the walls, and it needs a new kind of architecture so that people experience it in a more visceral way, which it can do. But I traveled the world looking for examples in the finest museums, MoMA as well, which is, you know, the center of photography, but it was always the wall. And I thought, no, that's not what I want for my images. I want a much more physical experience. And it's not about the photographs, because when I want this, then I would rather make a book and see what kind of physicality that can lead to. So definitely the idea has been to create a physical experience for photography, not just a two-dimensional experience. And this PowerPoint, it was more just to explain the idea of montage, because I felt a lot of people are just looking at the works and saying, oh, you make beautiful pictures. But that's just my raw material. That's just my starting point. And I know photography has all these incredible possibilities. And by building my own architecture, and the next show in Ahmedabad is called Photo Architecture, because it's just, I look around and I don't see someone having done something about activating photography, so I do it myself. And if it means I have to wear a jacket with 9 pockets so I can have 9 exhibitions that I can display outside or on the street, I would do that. I have no shame. It's part of my work to advocate it and to activate it. And so I'm very, very active also on Instagram. To explain all this, because
you throw out provocations often, or you know, and I imagine that it really does like sow that seed for people, and not just photographers, because it's all people dealing with visual culture, which we all do every day and increasingly so. And I wanted to talk a bit more about the book form, because we also have Martino's new book here. And I wanted, it's on a fantastic Swiss architectural photographer called Hélène Binet. And what does the book offer for you? And then we'll discuss with Martino as well, like the book form.
The physicality, you know. I've always had a problem with what the museum has done to photography and what the gallery has done to photography. So until I started to make my own architectures, the book is where I could really make museums out of the book. And it's the physicality of the book, as well as the fact that it's my sequence. It's how I've imagined an entire symphony, whereas in a gallery exhibition, you come in as the collector and you might pick out one note. But I always wanted my book to be inserted behind the frame, so I could say to people, you've got the full symphony, don't just pluck out one note. So I think for photographers, the editing, of course, but also the sequencing and the form is very much part of the work. Photography is no longer just about making images. That's sort of a given. That's where you start. And if you make beautiful images, that's fine. It's not so much about that. It's what you do with that material. And I'm very curious to see Helene's book, because I think of all the photographers, and it's interesting you bring this book, she's perhaps the one person I could be in conversation with, searching for that something else in architecture. It's not about architects. Yes, some architects give me what I want more than others, but it's really a sense in architecture that I'm looking for. And that's why the montages happen, because there's a certain kind of light, and I think Helene is also incredibly sensitive to the light that certain architectures produce. And Is that why the montages happen? I don't know. But definitely the book, because this will be her sequence. To me, it's more meaningful than an exhibition that is shown in a museum, because the curator has their montage that they will make. But here, she has designed which image leads to which image. So she's created the symphony. And that is something really unique that the book does.
And when you talk about you don't know what you're looking for, and I was just thinking, the way that you carry your camera, is it a physical thing that you're looking for when you talk about magic?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, yes. It's completely visceral. And it's to do with this part of the body. It's walking into the Kandalama hotel and feeling, I've been here before. There's this déjà vu. Or into the Chipperfield crematorium waiting room, and just feeling overwhelmed in the way. The only other way I felt that is in this auditorium with a great musician playing, you know? When you are beside yourself and sometimes you shed tears. And here, I feel that in architecture. I know I'm supposed to feel that in art because I'm an artist, but I feel that in architecture. And it's been so great to watch these films because it again reminds me that photography is not enough for architecture. It really needs the medium of film to give you some of that very visceral experience. So absolutely clear, it all comes from here. The photography, the experience of it, and sometimes you go into a great building, it's taken weeks to get permission, and you just don't make that connection.
I was going to say, so then, yeah, you have the times when you don't have that.
Of course.
And then do you just not even take photographs, or?
I always take a few photographs for the documentary's sake. You know, it's taken me a lot of time to get in there, so I take a few. They might want to use them for some documentary reason. But I know it's not that something else that I'm looking for. That then becomes further something else in the montages or in the constructed contact sheets.
And Martino, when you're working with the range of, I mean, you've worked globally in terms of your exhibition making. You've got a very sort of expanded notion of architecture. Your exploration has taken you to sort of, you've done a lot on decolonizing architecture, Soviet architecture. Do you have visceral relationships with these subjects?
Absolutely. I think, you know, to be turned on by something is, you know, to be moved by a building, a space is, you know, what I need that. I could not, you know, would not want to invest the little time we all have in our lives with things that don't move me in a way. And so I share that. I don't work as a photographer or as an artist, but as a curator, that is, you know, very, very important. I look for the things that I feel a connection to somehow, and it doesn't have to be a personal connection. I, you know, did a show on modernist architecture of the post-independence period in South Asia, and of course I've traveled to South Asia, had traveled before, so maybe that's the reason. So it's sometimes not easy to explain what it is that you know that turns you on, but that is, I think, really important. Yeah. Otherwise, it feels soulless and just not right. No, it doesn't really sing. I like the idea of the symphony. You know, this idea that, you know, it's a total work of art. Everything needs to come together, and then it really sings. I think the musical analogy really works for me too. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure it works in Eileen's work too.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, in a very interesting way, you know, she also prefers black and white, as you do, and I think she also very strongly believes, you were saying that very beautifully, thinks in terms of images not as individual statements, but as parts of larger constellations or sequences. I think you're thinking more spatially, you know, through your museums and the work that you've shown. Elaine thinks maybe more in terms of sequence. So what does it mean that one, you know, image comes after the next? She works in, you know, yeah, sort of more narrative forms, perhaps. And I think our book was trying to, illustrate that. Again, I think really it's, curating a show is not so dissimilar from curating a book, right? You select the images and then you bring them into a meaningful sequence, so it creates into a montage, if you want to.
On the wall, like you said.
Exactly, on the wall or on the pages of the book, absolutely, in the sequence of the pages of the book. And I mean, of course, you have constructed many books too, so I mean, that this is also a technique that you're very, I think familiar with. I was struck, I am struck by, have been thinking about, what is it that turns you on and why, what is it, it is interesting that you have this strong relationship to architecture. I mean, of course, you do many other things also, but architecture has been a focus of your work, to my great pleasure. And, like Elaine, I think you're obviously not an architectural photographer, but you're an artist or a photographer who takes architecture as the subject matter of their work. And so what kind of architecture is it? I mean, I cannot help noticing that it is, a very tectonic understanding of architecture. It's a sort of very... an architecture that is constructed out of verticals and horizontals. And, there's no expressionist architecture in your, it doesn't interest you. I don't think you would take a photo of a Zaha Hadid building. No. Yeah, I'm not surprised that you're saying that. And so that I find interesting because it shows really that you're thinking deeply through the logic of photography. I mean, photography is based on the frame, right? It's a square. It's the abstraction of a three-dimensional, complex spatial arrangement into a two-dimensional flat surface, which is, in a frame. And then in addition to the frame of the individual photograph, you frame it in additionally through your museums, through the wooden frames, through all these contraptions and constellations that you use to give the images back a sense of three-dimensionality and spatiality. And so I think, what turns you on is precisely this thinking of and through frames, how architecture is also the kind of architecture you're interested in, which happens to be the architecture I'm interested in too, constructed through frames, tectonics.
I hadn't thought of that. That's why we had to be on this stage. But yes, absolutely. There are no curves. It's how certain architects or certain architectures, I don't even know if it has to do with the architects, create these walls that reflect the light in a certain way. And I can also smell it when I go into a space. You can take me blindfold into it at night, but I can sort of smell what will happen with the light. And it's all to do with daylight. So I don't know how many architects that I'm drawn to have studied that much of how the light would change. But the light part is very important, and that works best on empty white walls. So I love...
Or concrete walls now. The refraction of light on concrete.
In black and white, I mean, black and white was made for concrete, or concrete was made for black and white, because it's just so beautiful. But the way it absorbs and reflects light is obviously very different from the white wall. And somewhere within that, I decide what I'm moved by. There has to be the light. Having said that, the Caesar building, the extension of the Ciralvis, there's hardly any natural light. It's all artificial light. But they opened that extension for 3 months with no art in it. It was the most beautiful experience I have had of architecture. All the lights, everything in place, no wires hanging around. And you paid a proper €20 ticket to go into this empty building. And I've been trying to suggest to my architect friends here, at least for a week, keep your building open to the public before it gets occupied. And it's difficult for me to create this kind of montage magic once it's occupied, unless it's like the few houses that we saw in Sao Paulo, which are also quite bare. And anything that's placed there is quite thoughtfully placed. It's not accumulated, as tends to happen in the homes. So a lot of the architecture I'm drawn to is actually of institutions, because like the Kanazawa Museum, I was very lucky to go there between shows, so there was nothing on the wall. That was like such a highlight for me. I don't know if that's any answer, but somewhere there is the importance of light for me and architects' walls that do that. Was it Louis Kahn who said light didn't know what she is till she hit a wall? Or have I just made that up?
No, I think Louis Kahn is, of course, the master of light as material in architecture. Have you taken photographs of Louis Kahn's work?
I have, of IIM, and I don't think I did justice to it.
Well, it has round forms. That's a problem now.
And it's brick, which reflects light quite differently. So I think it's a building I would need to spend a lot of time in to find.
What about the parliament in Dhaka?
So I'm waiting for the next prime minister to invite me to photograph the building.
Put it out there. Put it out there. It will come.
Yeah, yeah. Because they don't allow photography inside.
So just picking up on that, do you have a sort of wish list of places that you're
Absolutely,
planning?
absolutely. The parliament in Dhaka, the parliament in Colombo. It's 2 parliaments, actually, but a huge wish list. And, a huge wish list for America as well. And I saw the Schindler film, and it's a bizarre time to be watching a Schindler film. And, it's like, there's so much I want to photograph, so much.
And also, we're not even talking about the people you photograph. Like we're really concentrating on a smallish part of your, like.
I would like to have 10 parts of me. So one part could be with Scarpa, another part could be with the musicians, another part could be traveling around with Mona. So yes, I'm spread out in lots of directions, but I hold on to them. I can't let go,
But you're incredibly focused. That you're not,
yes.
When you say spread out, there's an thing, but you're incredibly focused,
yes.
And you are spread out in many ways because you've made your work as such that it can travel. And so we talked about Dayanita has this amazing museum that she wears, a jacket with lots of pockets, but also you work on different registers so that others can enjoy your work in different ways. So the boxes that you produce, and you can only buy them if you were there. And we were talking earlier about your dissemination of your work across India at the moment. And do you want to talk a bit about that, how you're sort of breaking up ideas, montaging exhibition practice?
So for me, photography is really dissemination, and therefore the book. And then I thought, what if I bring that idea to the exhibition? So I had this giant retrospective traveling around Europe, and that's come back, 2 massive containers. So I have all these exhibition copies of my work that have to be destroyed at some point because they belong in different collections. And I thought, what if I try and just disseminate the exhibition so that in Bombay you see the architecture-connected work, but if you went to Calcutta, you would see my entire museum archive. And in Jaipur, you would see the red bundles and my paper archives. And then this show from Bombay will go to Ahmedabad and Baroda. And Ahmedabad will get photo architecture out of it. And Baroda will get Mona and myself. So it's an experiment to see how much can I do on my own to disseminate all this work, and maybe to go to Varanasi, to go to Udaipur, to go to Coimbatore, places that don't necessarily get contemporary art shows. But the Musicians' Archive I want to take to Hyderabad, to Chennai, and I see it as part of my work. I see being the ambassador of my work. I see selling my boxes myself. It's all part of my work. So determining this tour, nobody has asked me to come and do this for them. You know, I don't wait for people to invite me. I just decide I'm going to go to Calcutta and I have to get into the Indian Museum. And I do it with the Bengal Biennale, but then it gets over. And then I want to stay on. And so now all my work is in the corridors of the Indian Museum. Even more people will see it. And the director said, well, you can have the corridor. No, but no artist would want to be in the corridor. I said, it's perfect. Give me your corridor. But I've also made those forms where I can really take my work onto Marine Drive. You know, the pillars you saw, the Doshi pillar and the Bava pillar and the Corbu pillar, I could put them on Marine Drive because nobody can do anything to them. At most, they'll put ice cream hands on the acrylic, so we change the acrylic. So I built my whole work so that I can disseminate it so easily and not have to wait for an institution or the gallery, because these are also just, it's all like your flavor of the month, and who knows when. So I'm really interested in the boxes. I'm interested that my archive is in your house, and it happens to be in both your houses. That is the true privilege of an artist, I feel, when your archive lives in people's homes, and that brings us back to the book. Because exhibitions come and go, but the book is what remains.
And also the portability of a book.
Yes.
And in terms of thinking about price points, it's much more accessible material. It doesn't need as much conservation. All these things are fantastic qualities of books. But in terms of digital dissemination, so we were talking earlier about what happens with montage in the digital age. And do you think about that with your work? Because you're, as you said, these things are not photoshopped. We're so used to seeing photoshopped images. I'm sure a lot of people assume they are, but they're not. This is a very analog process. And how do you feel about your relationship to the digital? I mean, beyond Instagram, I suppose.
Oh, I love Instagram. I think it's great for putting out prompts, for provocations, for news about my books, news about my exhibitions. I don't need a website. I don't need a gallery. I don't need, you know, if the media is there, it's great. If it's not there, I'm still doing I can put things out. I'm also putting a lot of concepts out there and provocations. Why photograph? Why do we photograph? What is the need to photograph? But I think montage suffers in the digital because now it's on your phone. Anyone can make a montage and wipe out. So, but I love the idea of the analog montage, and which is why perhaps we haven't had another solid book since Martino's book, which was 10 years ago?
8.
So I keep looking because I feel, and I keep telling Martino to introduce me to his younger students who might be working on the montage. And somehow, perhaps, montage has become so common now with the digital that it would take an exhibition to make people really see the magic of what a montage can do.
And isn't that what you're trying to do with your exhibition here? I mean, it's interesting, you know, there were quite a few people in the gallery this morning when we visited, and, you know, it's, as an architect or somebody who's trained in looking at architectural images, it's kind of immediately evident that the spaces they create, they cannot actually be built spaces. I mean, the column is in the wrong place, the bathroom is not, you know, is not in the right place, etc., etc. But for sort of the not, you know, for the general audience, I think it's not so immediately evident that your montages are montages as opposed to just documentary representations of spaces that exist. So you make a deliberate effort to hide the fact that we're talking about montage, and it becomes a game kind of deciphering what is going on here, and you know, that's the fun of it. But it takes a little time and effort to engage with the game, which I really appreciate. I think it's an invitation to, you know, activate the audience, which I think is very beautiful.
Yes, because I feel quite tired with the way people look at photographs, again, because of the digital world. People are so used to seeing photographs that architects walk past that first montage and say, ah, Bhabha, you know. Perhaps we're losing a certain kind of seeing, and I was hoping that with the exhibition, some of that people might sort of realize, like when they look at the Barcelona pavilion, I thought that would give them a jump start and say, oh my God, is this all lies? Is everything deception in this show? So I don't know if they're really getting it, but then how much should an artist explain? I've never done this kind of presentation that I did here. I just thought it's interesting for the architects because I want to understand what is going on. What am I picking up on that is all just fitting together, like Lego, you know?
And also, I was thinking about with the contact sheets when we were talking about writers, I was asking you, are there sort of architectural historians who've been following this? You can create whole new architectural histories from this, like you're sort of, you know, Warburg, how he organized his materials.
Yes.
You're a sort of Warburgian approach in that
Yes.
you're creating these connections, and it would be great for me, because I'm sort of a woman of the word, to have like someone talk through what might have been going on, as you were saying, what's going on.
Yes, well, now I have you and I have Martino, so I have some conversation to start, but I think we're at the end.
I think that's a good place to stop our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. There are many films going on into the evening, tomorrow as well. Stir is also online all year round. We have fantastic articles. And as we said, this is part of a log series. We're about people, ideas, bringing them together. And thank you for being here and being our people.